Welcome, my dear friends. It's great to see you again. In case we haven't been introduced, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an enjoyer of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. On this episode, I'm going to get to do two of those things because we're going to be doing an RPG module review of R2 Beneath the Great Rift and having a short interview with the creator. The creator of the module, not the creator of Heaven and Earth, not that. I mean, Joe has aspirations, but he's not there yet. Adventure Module R2, Beneath the Great Rift, was written for the adventure's dark and deep role-playing game system, which is itself an outgrowth of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st Edition. As such, it's compatible with pretty much any old-school system you like to play. The adventure is designed for 4 to 6 player characters of levels 6 to 8 each. And this is written by Joseph Bloch, also known as Greyhawk Grognard, who runs a fantastic YouTube channel. I'd highly recommend you check him out, under his BRW Games label. As you might have guessed, with this being R2, there was an R1 that came before it in the Rift series, set in the world of Greyheim. And if you're curious about what I had to say about R1 Into the Great Rift, I recommend you check out this video right here. It was quite the module, and I suggest everybody rip it off. It's an easy and fun read. Highly recommend it. And if you watch that video or read the module, you'll understand how we get to where we start at in R2. But don't worry, I'll catch you up just enough to where everything I talk about is going to make sense. But be warned, part of the mystery we're going to explore will only be detailed in R3, which one day we're going to check out. So let's see how R2 sells itself. Investigating a newly uncovered complex of caves in the side of the Great Rift, you and your companions discover a hive of the mysterious derro. Now you have discovered that the cave is merely an opening to a vast world beneath the surface of the earth, and an expedition must be undertaken to both explore this dark realm, as well as to halt whatever sinister plans the derro have for the surface dwellers. And here I'm going to throw up that spoiler warning, and do highly encourage anybody who's watching this to man up and run this adventure for your group. It's only 8 pages long, it's easy and straightforward to understand and run, and it's quite a tense good time. But if you don't want to do it, well, go ahead and spoil yourself and then send this to your regular DM in the hopes he'll run it for you and just play dumb along the way. For credits, we get Joseph Bloch, and that's it. He's one-man banding it in this one, but the level of the writing and the editing were excellent, and our art selection consists of one licensed cave photo, which is minimal, but the photo is suitably evocative of the terrain we're going to be in this entire adventure. The maps are done by Joe, and they are varied, interesting, and they work. There is also one player handout with a map attached to it, which will be very important later. And that's all we got. Since it's just one guy to credit and he did everything, we've covered it. We're done. And you know how I like to give publication background on the modules that I cover. But here, since this is a module put out by a small independent publishing label, there's not a whole lot of it out there. And I couldn't find any video reviews on YouTube for this module. But that's okay, because after I get done with my walkthrough of the module, we're going to have a talk with Joe about what inspired him to write it and what was going on in his head when he came up with this very interesting piece of work. So this video is me creating the publication history of R2. So let's get right into this thing and have the introduction set the mood for us. This module is the second in a series of adventures taking place in, around, and under the Great Rift, an enormous canyon more than 100 miles long, situated in the middle of an area of badlands and wastes in the heart of the Brigand Realms. Having explored the newly uncovered caverns on the south rim of the Great Rift, the PCs have uncovered a colony of derro, and hints about some great scheme that will impact the surface. They can then continue to explore the Underdark regions surrounding the Great Rift. This adventure brings the player characters to the Great Academy of the Derro, where they can discover the nature of the plot and hopefully bring it to an end. So that's the overview that the DM gets. Now, players do get an introduction as well. Having undertaken to explore the newly discovered cave complex on the southern edge of the Great Rift, your party has uncovered a nest of the treacherous derro, who never have good intentions for those who dwell on the fair surface of the world. Finding a passage that leads miles into the underworld beneath the land surrounding the rift, you pursue the fleeing survivors of the derro outpost, hoping to discover the nature of their plan and thwart it. And so this module just takes your party and drops them right at the entrance of the caves. Simple as that. No lengthy preamble, no worrying about how to hook your party into the adventure. You just drop them at the door and say, that's it, way to the adventure. Try it sometime. Now this underworld, Bloch gives us some details about that. The section of the underworld that connects to the new caverns mostly runs from the southern edge of the Great Rift to the environs of Fairfeather Mountain with its volcanic vents and tubes. There is, however, a region beneath the floor of the Great Rift that dates back to its calamitous origin. Teaser. Passages in the underworld are classified as primary, secondary, and tertiary as noted on the underworld map. Primary passages are 30 to 40 feet wide and ceilings vary from 20 to 50 feet. The floor is clear of most debris, and while stalactites stud the ceilings, the floors are mostly clear of stalagmites. Floors will have tiers up to 3 feet high, which prevents the passage of contemporary wagons or horses. Mules will be able to navigate such hazards without impediment, as will pack lizards. Note that teleportation will not work in the depths of the underworld. So that's very similar to Gary Gygax's conception of when you get too far underground, teleport just ain't gonna save you anymore. You're down there, you're going to have to deal with it. As you can see from the underworld map, there's quite a bit of exploration to do, with each hex representing 1 mile. And the basic rate of travel is 1 mile, 1 hex on the map, per inch of movement rate per day. Because in the earliest editions of Dungeons & Dragons, character movement wasn't measured in feet, it was measured in inches. Now, first and second edition movement rates did correspond to each other. So a character with 6 inches of movement in first edition would have 60 feet of movement in second edition, and 12 inches of movement, like your normal human, would be 120 feet per round in second edition. So at best, you're probably pulling 12 miles a day in the underground. And per this map, that means you're gonna be down there for a while. And if you're a party of shorties, you're going to be down there for even longer. Random encounters should be rolled for when entering each hex, as noted in the encounter tables below. And we do get 2 random encounter tables, one for the larger tunnels that your party might travel through, and one for the smaller tunnels that are even more restricted. Now bear in mind that this underworld is not like the Forgotten Realms Underdark, where there's cities everywhere and you're practically tripping over oddities every day of your journey. No. This is a much more sparsely populated area. There's not casual tourists going through, not giant war bands. This is an underground, inhospitable region where there's not a lot of resources to go around. So population sizes are not big, and your isolation is very real. Now the primary and secondary tunnels, we get some interesting encounters like giant slug, rust monsters, friggin' little germ lanes. You can get a derro patrol from the Red College. You get some giant insects, some puddings, jellies, derro spies from the Green College. So I assume those are rivals of the Red College. Or you might run into some deep giants who we'll talk about later out for the hunt. Now in those smaller tunnels that I was talking about with even more restricted movement, it gets nastier. Yes, you get giant insects that can ruin your day, but you also get a trapper. You get the new monster, the yellow living crystal, which I found quite interesting. You got derro showing up from both green and red colleges. You get umber hulks, deep gnomes. Okay, you might find a friendly face there. Piercers, some drow show up, and a friggin' vampire. So it's not bad enough that you're stuck way down beneath the earth where you can't safely magic yourself out. Probably having to rely on artificial sources of light. You have the resources you have. There's danger on every turn. It's dark all the time. And now you're in a narrow tunnel and a vampire shows up. Friggin', hey, think how crazy that vampire is going to be, and you get to hang out with him. So the starting location is the exit from the derro outpost detailed in R1 into the Great Rift. And this is the starting point of the adventure. Half a mile beyond the gate from the new cavern into this underworld, there's the body of a derro messenger who's he's dead, and now he's getting picked over by a bunch of germline. And once you chase them off, there is an important note on this derro, summoning the leader of the derro outpost, Givaz Rento, to come down to the ruins of a place called Solero. He's being summoned by somebody named TN, and there is a basic map to help get there. And that map is going to be really important, because if your players don't pay attention to that map, then they're going to spend a lot of time wandering around, probably lost down here. Now, to get from the cave where you find the body to the deeper underworld, you come across the Great Falls. This is one of the few means of travel between the underworld beneath the Great Rift and that larger portion that exists mere hundreds of feet below the surface. The Great Falls is an underground waterfall that tumbles approximately 100 feet to the bottom. There are 2 means of movement up and down. The first is a spiral staircase, and screw that, I hate those things. That runs next to the waterfall, allowing movement of people and light loads, so it's going to be nice and slick too. In addition, there's a large winch and pulley system that allows for the movement of beasts of burden, wagons, and large loads of cargo. That sounds better. The winch is operated by a pair of giant trolls that are slaves of the derro who claim ownership of the falls. The giant trolls are chained to the winch and will only attack if they themselves are attacked. as they greatly resent their derro masters. And there's a bunch of derro hanging around here at any given time. And if any derro survive from the outpost, they will have warned these derro to be on the lookout, who won't let the intruders come down the hoist platform and fire missiles at them as they come down the stairs. If the PCs make it to them, they run for their lives. But if they haven't been warned ahead of time, they'll assume these are just some travelers that they can milk a platinum piece out of to use the lift. That's not a bad deal. One route through the underworld takes you by a myconid circle, which is cool, as those things usually are. They might be friendly, or they might be hostile, or they might be tripping balls out of their gourd. And there's a random chance of each one of those things. I always find these myconid groves neat. Now here you might be able to loot or trade for some interesting potions, because the Myconid King is quite the skilled alchemist, including one called the Potion of Prophecy, which we'll talk more about later. Following the map along, you come to the Living Pool, which is mostly an environmental hazard, but boy is it backed up with some danger. This cave is mostly filled by a large pool, save for a single ledge along the east wall, which varies between 6 and 12 feet wide. Pack lizards, because those are a thing here, can make the journey if led carefully, but wagons will simply be too wide to pass. The pool is some 25 feet deep at the middle, and this is where its denizens congregate, unseeable from the surface. Who are those denizens? 4 crystal oozes, who will screw you up if given the chance. Now there's a roll to see if, by passing by the pool or entering the pool, that a PC might trigger these oozes to come after him. Well, one way the derro get around it is they bring along a sacrificial victim, toss the poor bastard into the water so the oozes swarm them and the derro just bop on by. That's one way to risk mitigate. Down a different tunnel, there's some Gale of Dur with the treasure. But more interestingly, sort of between those two paths, are renegades, this section. I'm quite intrigued by what's going on here in the backstory for these folks. A pair of driders are here, which that usually means very bad business, by the name of Matrala and Finroth. They're joined by a mind flayer named Shushvib, and they're all bros. The Driders were driven out of the Drow community that they were in. Well, the mind flayer, he was ejected from the great mind flayer city of Mishlarog to the northwest, and somehow they all found their way to each other for mutual protection. They've struck up an unlikely friendship, and are more loyal to one another as can be expected from creatures of their ilk. Despite Matrala being a cleric of Fraz Urblu, who is an awful demon prince, which aren't all demon princes awful. I mean, none of them are good. But he's a demon prince of betrayal, so having this NPC there, that's troubling. Finroth is quite a skilled magic user, and the 3 of them are up for being hired on as mercenaries if the player characters approach them peacefully and calmly. I read that to mean they don't inherently attack anybody who shows up. They're willing to talk. And if your party's willing to talk back to them, they can help them out. And they might need to be helped out, as we'll see in a few minutes. However, I got a question. Their price to be hired is 1,000 platinum pieces each, plus a magic item for each one of the 3. That's a bit steep, and I don't know a whole lot of parties that go wandering around in the Underdark or Underworld in this case with multiple thousands of platinum pieces sitting around. Platinum's expensive, and to have that kind of money to throw around, I'd probably lower it to 1,000 gold pieces each. Because frankly, what else are they going to do for money? And now that I think about it, who are they going to spend it with? There's not really societies nearby. There's not even really an economy nearby. So who are they paying what to? Whether you befriend or whether you befoe. That's a cool word. We should make that a thing. Befoe. The Drider and Mind Flayer, we come to the objective of this module, the Ruins of Slaro. This large cavern is dimly lit by a bioluminescent lichen on the walls and ceiling, giving everything a pale yellow-green glow sufficient to see from one end of the cavern to the other. It is approximately 70 feet high in the center. The tunnel divides into several smaller passages, all of which open up into the large cavern. They do, however, provide some cover and allow the PCs to see what is going on before they boldly walk into the cavern. Further in the cavern, there is movement, as derros, slaves, giants, and short, spindly creatures with large eyes and gray skin, Petch, can be seen going about various errands, while clumps of Rothe, that's underworld cows to you, mill about, slowly munching on lichen and other plants. It is not unknown for underworld travelers to enter the cavern, but none of the inhabitants are particularly desirous of such, each for their own reasons. The deep giants have dwelt here the longest and occupy one of the ancient ruined buildings. They send hunting parties into the tunnels of the underworld and keep a herd of Rothe as well. Their chief desire is solitude. The derro have been here for some months, engaged in exploration of the various ruins, seeking clues to some great power which they believe is here. They have not been permitted to explore the giant's building. The Petch are newcomers, looking to mine and work the stone found here. The derro are horrified by the prospect, fearing the Petch might destroy some vital clue to the location of the power they seek, but are not strong enough to force them out, especially not without upsetting the giants. Thus, the derro must play a waiting game, seeking an opportunity to finish their exploration without interference. There is an enchantment on the north and northwest passage exiting Slaro. Without the great ruby and the ziggurat, spoiler, there's a great ruby and a ziggurat, the idea of entering the passages will simply not occur to anyone. Even animals will avoid them. And so for the Ruins of Slaro map, we see a number of locations, and each are tied to one of the factions we just talked about, plus a couple more for blood sacrifice fun. So we're going to do a quick overview of each of those locations. The Lesser Hall is inhabited by the elemental plane of Earth-based humanoid creatures, the Petch. They're pretty cool little guys. I first encountered one in one of those endless quest books where you're supposed to help free them from slavery. But these are free, and they're down here just mining the crap out of everything they can get and defacing every piece of stonework they can mess with, which is what's driving the derro up the wall. Because the derro are here to see what these strange runes on these buildings might teach them. And the Petch are just scribbling them right out the hard way. These are peaceful folks, and they do have a little bit of treasure. They might be able to help you if you want to go after the derro, but they're not aggressive by nature. They don't want to pick fights. Now, of course, the derro are different. They're insane subterranean psychic blind dwarves. They're gonna be a little more bellicose. And so at their encampment, they got a bunch of lizard hide tents set up. They've got their supplies on hand. They got guards. They got slaves. They're living their best life. Now, the guy running this is Therak Nur, a master of the Red College of the derro, one of its fourth circle, which apparently rules that college. He's tasked with finding the secret of the great power rumored to be found within Slaro, and is incredibly frustrated with his lack of progress due to the presence of the deep giants in the greater hall. He knows that the carvings on the surfaces of the buildings have some great significance, but has been unable to figure out the secret of deciphering them. He will be greatly pleased if that secret is gleaned under his watch. He looks down on the outpost commander, Jivaz Rento, as an inferior because he is of a lesser circle at the college, but he believes Rento can help solve the riddle of the inscriptions because of his unique skills. And that greater hall, with all those giants in it, this is a large stone building with a vaulted dome rising some 30 feet above the floor of the cavern. The walls are decorated with strange, undulating carvings, both within and without. If both a comprehend languages and a read magic spell are cast upon the exterior carvings, they will be found to be generic praise of something called the Scaled Lord, with repeated references to the Garden of the Scaled Lord, wherein he frolics with his children. Now, the giants inside, they don't know about that. They don't care about that. They merely want to live their simple lives, hunting in the tunnels and tending their flock of Roth. Now, the derro, and later the Petch, they've been disturbed in their solitude, and they're getting to the point where they will insist on their neighbors in the cavern departing. And given that they're giants, I figure there's one way that's going to go. There's not a whole lot of interest going on inside of the greater hall unless you want to just rumble with a bunch of giants and take their stuff. But there you mostly get some jewelry and maybe one magic item. The only real sense of direction we get as to how these factions might want to proceed is here in room 4 with the chief of the giant clan named Carton. He wants nothing more than for his tribe to return to their isolation, get all these noisy short people out, and will look favorably on any plan to remove the derro and the Petch from the cavern, or at least hasten their departure. So if the party wants to help him with that, he'll like that. Under no circumstances will he allow the derro to inspect the inscriptions on the greater hall, as he sees this as an intolerable intrusion on their privacy. Now, one of the rooms has me particularly interested, though. The giants avoid this chamber, as it is haunted. The ghost of a snake man is here. The ghost is tens of thousands of years old and is only able to maintain its existence because it is bound to a flint knife that is mixed in with some debris on the floor. It cannot move more than 3 inches from the knife, as it is not the spirit of an evil human. Its attack or visage does not cause aging. Well, that's interesting. So we get a ghost that's bound to a fetter in this room, and it scares off the giants. And we get some details about it to where if we wanted to flesh this thing out, we could, but the world in which it lived is so far gone, it's almost like a nature spirit hanging out in here. I wonder what creative players could do with a creature like that. Because it's bound to a knife. You could carry it around. What could you offer it for it to be your ally? Is it too far gone and too crazy for that to even be possible? I don't know, but the possibilities are there. which is one of those things that I like about these Joe Bloch adventures, is because he gives you interesting locations, people, and items, and doesn't give a whole lot of direction one way or another, which leaves you free to come up with what you want to happen with these things. Because remember, I read the listing about the derro. It did not say they will attack the party on sight. It didn't do that, which implies maybe you can work with them. You could work with the Petch. You could work with the giants. This is an instance where you could engage in faction play. I think the module's open enough to where you could ally with any one of these. Now, they might betray you, but they might not. Heck, those Driders and the Mind Flayer that you may have hired, they might betray you, but it doesn't say that they will, which means that they might not, which I would find more interesting than your standard Underdark where everything's out to eat and betray you. Now, touching on the other locations we got here, the Stone Circle. Spanning the stream is a circle of stone triliths, forming a ring. They're pretty big, and the whole will radiate magic if detected for. And they're decorated in the same undulating decorative carvings that the buildings of the cavern share. The circle is a means of making offerings to the Scaled Lord we talked about, one of the animal lords who predates actual deities. Neither a read magic nor comprehend languages spell will be effective on their own, but if the two are used together on the stones, the decorative carvings will be transliterated into symbols which can then be spoken. This is a chant, and if spoken aloud for one round, the stones will begin to glow with a reddish light, seemingly from within. On the second round, they will glow orange, then yellow, and so on until they are violet on the seventh round. If the chant is maintained for an eighth round, the stones will burst into a brilliant white light, and a sibilant sound like an enormous serpent will fill the air. This will last for up to 3 rounds. And this is where the first sacrifice comes in. If the party for some reason brought along a bird egg, then the Scaled Lord's going to be very happy, take it away, and then bless everybody within 10 feet of the stone circle for the next 7 days. If there's no eggs present, the Scaled Lord will expect a mammal sacrifice. So the mammal within the circle and closest to its center will be completely drained of its life force, sucked dry. If this happens, one person inside the circle will be healed of all damage except 1d4 HP. Reptilian creatures inside the circle will be healed first, then avians, then mammals, and other sorts of creatures. If no such sacrifice is offered, all those who are engaged in voicing the chant will be struck dumb, as in mute, for the next 1 to 4 days. This prevents speech as well as any spellcasting with a verbal component. So don't go chanting to Scaled Lords in strange stone circles. That's my takeaway here. And that's pretty cool because as a sacrificial spot, it's not intended to benefit the party. It's intended to feed the Scaled Lord, which might teach your players that not everything that they can interact with should they interact with. Now that ziggurat we mentioned earlier. This stone step pyramid rises approximately 40 feet above the floor of the cavern with 3 steps connected by a ramp zigzagging up. Unlike the other structures, there are none of the swirling carvings on the surface save at the top where a cylindrical stone is the only adornment. Now if you got a magic user who does the comprehend languages read magic duo act on this thing, another hissing chant will be revealed, and if vocalized for a very short amount of time, the cylinder will seem to dissolve into a ghostly translucent form. It's actually in a semi-ethereal state, and the party will be able to go through it into the ziggurat. And down there are scenes of a lost world decorating the walls of the chambers. There's a beaten copper bowl, an obsidian knife, and an earthenware pot rests on top of both, with some sort of black material dried on its bottom. I wonder what that could be. If the pot is filled with wine or other alcohol and swirled around, the black material will dissolve into it, enough for 6 doses. I wonder what those do. Whomever drinks the resulting potion will then be able to step on the circular portion of the floor and will melt right through it, as if under the effect of a featherfall spell. Ooh. They'll then be in the middle chamber, which is decorated in a mosaic of snakes twisting in and out of one another. But a careful examination shows this is only one snake wrapping itself around the room in an intricate knot-like pattern. And here there's a copper brazier in the center of the room. If it's lit and the obsidian knife is used to shed blood into it, ooh, blood sacrifice. The chamber will fill with thick smoke. It'll dissipate within a round, and those that are in the chamber will find themselves in a different, larger room, in fact, the lower chamber. And there's going to be all kinds of neat stuff in there, but most importantly, there is that special ruby. There's an enormous ruby here that's guarded by a stone serpent. Now, the ruby itself is easily worth 100,000 gold pieces. 100,000 gold pieces. But if you try to take it, that snake turns out to be a stone golem that's going to try to mess you up. Now, if you survive that fight, turns out that ruby is the secret to breaking the enchantment that bars people from even thinking about going into those northern tunnels which coincidentally is where R3 takes place. Now, if you detect magic on the ruby, it's going to strongly radiate an enchantment. Any creature staring into the ruby for more than a few seconds must make a saving throw versus spells or enter a trance, during which time they will become convinced that there is a paradise to the north, and if they can but reach it, they will be granted every comfort and live in bliss for the rest of their days. Reptiles of all sorts will fail such a roll automatically, and that applies to your pack lizards if you got them, so they're going to run off and try to go up north if you can't keep them corralled. And that ends the adventure. Now let's take a look at the extras that we got. So there's those deep giants that we talked about, and they are relatives of the stone giant, but they seem a little more practical and down to earth than the stone giants. They're not concerned with deep philosophical constructs. They're concerned with day-to-day life. And they like rust monsters and keep them as pets. That's pretty neat. Now these yellow living crystals, these are a follow-up to the purple living crystals we saw on R1, and these target magic use. They're extremely sensitive to magic, and if any spells are cast in a given range of the crystals, they're going to explode, causing shrapnel to eat up your magic user and everybody around them. So be careful with these crystals. I like it, and I like that there's more than one type of living crystal, so good on Joe for coming up with this. Now, magic items, we get a combination of really interesting and, that makes sense. In the, that makes sense category, we got the fast spear. Basically, instead of a sword of speed, you have a spear of speed. Why not? Makes a lot of sense to me. You get a potion of speaking with fungi, which is like speak with plants, but just with fungi, because fungi are in fact not plants, the more you know. And that potion of prophecy I mentioned earlier, well, we get the details here. One of the unique products of the fungal alchemy of the Myconid kings, this potion causes the drinker to experience vivid hallucinations. There is an 80% chance that these hallucinations are actually prophecies of things to come, and those things which are seen will come to pass within 1 to 12 days. Ooh. These visions can be avoided by a conscious choice, but there is a 60% chance that any attempt to do so will result in some worse outcome. Ooh. And that's it for R2. Not as ambitious as R1, it's still really neat, and it reminded me of reading Descent into the Depths of the Earth, where the sense of isolation, of being stuck in a deep, dark, inhospitable location, was on full display. So while this is not at all the same as Descent into the Depths of the Earth, I like that I have more than one module that captures that feeling now. I like it, I would run it as is, but I do have a couple critiques. If the party, for some reason, doesn't pay attention to that message that the fallen derro messenger had at the beginning of the adventure, they could get lost all over the place down here and spend a lot of time sucking life in deep, dark tunnels. And two, the introduction of the adventure said that the party was going to make it to the Great Academy of the derro. But I don't see where that happened. I see where they encounter an encampment of some representatives from the Great Academy of the derro. As a matter of fact, we got a second academy introduced, and we didn't get to go see that either. But the adventure works just as is. You can run it today. And now, let's hear some more from the creator. Maybe he'll clear up one of those questions for me. And here we go with Joseph Bloch. My dear friends, to give us that additional background on R2, we have the man himself, Joseph Bloch. Again, welcome back to the show. Always good to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Always wonderful to be here.
Heck yeah. So, like I ask you each time we do this and the other independent authors, what inspired you to write R2?
The whole R series is supposed to be kind of an homage to the Bro series, the D series. It was originally, the idea was it was going to follow the same pattern. It's an underdark adventure, and I wanted to tie it into the Great Rift and so on. What I had originally envisioned was that this was going to be kind of the intermediate step between the first one, which introduced the players into the environment, and then the big thing is going to happen at the end, and you needed a way to get them from point A to point C. It was originally supposed to be a transitional module. As you've probably gleaned, it didn't end up that way. It didn't take the direction that I thought it was going to take.
What was the direction you thought it was going to go?
Well, originally, this was going to be the Derro Academy, because I had set that up in the first one, where there were the Blue Academy and the Red Academy, and there were kind of this friction between them, and I wanted to do this whole thing. And I was kind of working through it in my mind and writing some stuff down and doing some maps and stuff, and it felt just way too much like Shrine of the Quotoa, where it was this big monolithic building in a cavern, and it didn't grab me. And, so I was my head against the wall on it. And then I did some more research on the Great Rift in Greyhawk, because that's my inspiration. And I remembered the Battle of Pesh, which in the Greyhawk campaign setting is this big apocalyptic thing that happened millions of years ago, and it was a whole big thing, and it happened there. That started my wheels turning, and I could somehow tie this whole series into that event. Then I still had the derro to deal with, so I had to do something with them. So I kind of pivoted and turned the intermediate step, the R2 that's going to take you to R3, and it turned more into the Indiana Jones, where in the first movie, where they're in the desert and the Nazis are digging up Tanis and looking for the Ark and everything. That became my inspiration for this, which is why you now have a derro kind of field expedition. But it's still led by the academicians. The derro sages and savants are still there as the leaders, but now it's become, they're intense in an archaeological dig. And that's how I wanted to approach it, just like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that was the inspiration for the particular setting. And then I had the big MacGuffin in the ziggurat, and that would take you into the final chapter. But once I pivoted away from this is going to be the big encounter where you get to see all the machinations of the derro to this is more of an intermediate step, and we're going to have to stop the derro from doing whatever they're doing in the next one. That's where it clicked.
But the Darrow Academy. So in this one, we get references to the Reds and to the Greens. Are we going to get anything about the Darrow Academies?
Eventually, there's a lot on that map that remains to be explored. I have not shelved the Derro Academy at all. It's still going to be there, but it might end up being a lot more like Vault of the Drow than what we had before. It might be a lot more expansive rather than just the Academy. It might be the entire Darrow city or whatever. I have not given up on it, and that map is got plenty on it.
Another faction that pops up in this adventure are the Deep Giants. My question about them is, why make the Deep Giants when we have Stone Giants at home?
Because I wanted something that was more Underdark specific, in the same way that we have Deep Gnomes and we have the Grey Dwarves and so on. We have Underdark versions of everything except halflings. I'm still tempted to do that, to put that in there at some point.
I can edit that part out if you want to keep that secret.
But I wanted to have a more Underdark specific thing because stone giants, while yes, they do dwell underground primarily, I think of them more as the stone giants in Tolkien's Misty Mountains, where they're throwing the boulders during the thunderstorms and stuff. Their primary interactions are with the surface. I wanted something that was exclusively in the Underdark for all time. And that's why I wanted to come up with a new type of giant.
And their flavor is a bit different. They seem to come across more like primitive than stone giants typically are portrayed, especially as the D&D editions went along, where they got more cerebral. There's definitely room for it. I was just curious, why?
Because I like to create weird stuff. That's if I can make a new kind of monster for the players to fight that they've never seen before or interact with that they've never seen before, I'm going to do that.
Like the living crystals that you kept popping up with?
Exactly.
I like those. And in this one, the yellow living crystals and how it's a bad deal to be around them if you're a magic user. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Yes, exactly. Because there are anti-magic things in the rules already. There's disenchanters and things like that. But I wanted something that was a little more unique than just, I'm going to take away all your spell abilities.
Oh yeah, no, it gave me the feeling of dealing with these things as a magic user. You have to kind of step over the laser beams that would trip the big trap that blows up the entire room. And
exactly,
that sense of tension is cool. But speaking of weird stuff, in the new magic items you give us, the Potion of Prophecy, I want to give you props on that, my man, because while you imbibe it and it makes you hallucinate wildly, the fact that it's incredibly likely that what you see in those hallucinations will come to pass, that's a bit of boldness out of magic item design that I'm not used to seeing. Usually things like that, it just cops out as left to the DM's discretion, or it's not going to really mean anything. It's just a mess with the player. But this is something solid. What drove you to come up with that?
A lot of references we have in folklore and so on lead researchers to think that our ancestors, especially those in shamanistic societies, would use various plants and mushrooms and things like that to experience hallucinatory states, and they would take that as prophecy. I just nudge that a little more to the literal. Functionally, it's really no different than a cleric getting like a scroll of some divinatory spell.
Contact outer plane or something like that.
Yeah, functionally it's about the same, except it's, because it's a potion, anybody can do it. But it's a little more flavor that I throw in there, and especially when you're dealing with myconids, because they should come across as really alien and really different than any other kind of society that you've ever seen, because they have that whole gestalt thing going. And I wanted to throw something in there that was a little off kilter for what you normally see.
Yeah, it was neat. And as we're talking about it, I think that if when I ever run this, some of those deep giants are going to be friends with that Myconid king, and the players will have to deal with deep giant that's under the influence of one of these things. He's going to be spouting all kinds of weird stuff. Maybe it'll come true for the players. Who knows?
They keep making the potion of prophecy, and they keep feeding it to him because they think he's actually more accurate with it.
Huh.
Whether he is or not. But that's why they have him there, is he's become kind of their shaman.
Yeah, the deep giant shaman. And so when talking to the deep giants, they can find out, oh, this guy knows how this stuff works. And oh, man, that's good stuff right there. Speaking of interacting with the different factions down there, from just a plain reading of R2, it seemed like you could engage in faction play once you get down to the big area where that's available, where you have the different groups at.
I always try to put that kind of stuff in if I can.
Which surprised me, because in theory you could partner up with the derro that are down there, because they can't
you
go
could
into
also partner up with one faction against another, and there's all kinds of ways you can wheel your way in there. A lot of times, if the PCs come in strong, swords are swinging, they're going to get pasted, and rightly so. It's fun emerges, for my mind, when they interact with the derro and the other factions and bad guys and stuff like that, rather than just kind of mowing through them like a saw.
Well, and thinking about the standard module where faction play is talked about, keep on the borderlands, I couldn't really see what the PCs had to offer the different factions, and I didn't see an in for them to really get in there, because the moment you encounter the humanoids, they're generally trying to kill you. So when do you really get to talk to them? But here, the ground is open for that kind of thing. And there's things that the PCs can get to that the derro can't, that they could use as a bargaining chip. And all the different factions want something. So good on that.
They have a common enemy, or at least a common potential enemy in the deep giants. So that gives the PCs an in with possibly dealing with the derro, or possibly dealing with the deep giants against the derro. You play it either way.
And I liked the triliths that were around the stream down there, and that it kind of would teach the party that maybe you shouldn't mess with every mysterious thing you come across. There's a possibility for something good to happen. Well, what's the chance that somebody's playing a lizard man that's gone down there and is actually going to reap the benefit? No, one of them's probably going to get their soul sucked out to the reptile god. And I dig that.
That was inspired by the Temple of the Eye from G3, called the Fire Giant King, and there's another one in the Vault of the Drone. Where you've got this altar of the elemental god, and you start poking around, and chances are a big orange tentacle is going to come out of the thing and grab you and take you off to Netherland.
Yeah, it's like its own trap. And I dig it. One last character I want to bring up that I found on your encounter table. It's the tertiary tunnel encounters. It's possible to encounter a vampire. Now, I've just got the feeling that whatever vampire you encounter down there is going to be crazy. They're going to be off the wall, starving. This is not going to be a happy encounter at all. And for the PCs going down here, should have a decent amount of levels on them. But man, that doesn't look fun. Did you have a particular type of vampire in mind for that random encounter, or is it that ravenous, crazy?
Not really. I kind of leave that one up to the DM to flesh out. There are vampires, obviously, in the original D1, D2, D3 modules. There's the one vampire who's got the succubus in the approach to Errol Kinlu. That's the kind of thing I would rather not give too much detail on, and let the DM run with it, because I know when I run a game like that, I'm going to mold that vampire's personality around the PCs and around their expectations and how they approach it and everything like that. But if I lay out this big chunk of text that gives a story, and he will do this on round one, he will do this on round two, I don't like to micromanage like that, especially when it comes to a random encounter. It's very possible you could see that vampire twice, and it could be two different vampires. So I don't want to chain the DM too much with too much detail.
On a technical note about the layout of the book, I noticed that there's a lot of blank pages at the back. There are like 3, 4 of them. Can you tell us what the format issue is with doing small press printings?
It's done print on demand, and there is a minimum page count for books that you do through Drive-Thru RPG. So that's what that is. That's just bringing it up to the minimum number of pages. It's as simple as that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I suspected it might be something like that.
It doesn't really add anything to the cost, because that's like the bare minimum cost anyway.
That makes sense. Now, do you ever run these modules
Yes.
at cons?
I do. I run these. I run some of the free ones. I haven't really run a ton of games at cons lately because I've been going as a vendor. And I find that if I'm in the vendor hall all day selling stuff, the last thing I want to do at night is to run a game. I've tried it and I suck. I am like the worst DM. I tried this at GaryCon once where I was in the hall all day and then I ran Castle Mount Archmage and my God, I was terrible. So I either go to a con now, and I'm starting to go to more cons as a guest where I can actually run stuff all day long. So you're going to see me running more of these things. But there are some local cons I go to where I run the modules rather than going as a vendor. But that's why lately I have been exclusively going as a vendor, but that's starting to, the pendulum's swinging back on that. So if you want me to run games at cons, just make me a guest.
Good to know. Do you have any memories from running this at a con or at your own table?
Not specifically. I mean, the players in my group, they just kind of pulled their way through. They didn't do all the fun role playing stuff. They just kind of waited until the derro weren't looking and then they just kind of wiped them out and then they went into the ziggurat and they used a lot of divination spells to figure out what they were supposed to do and then off they went. So it was not nearly as fun as I had hoped it was going to be, but I have gotten feedback from other people who really liked it. So.
And the last question I got for you before I let you go is the ziggurat and
Yes.
the pseudo-ethereal, I believe is the term that you use, ways that you trigger getting further down into it. What was the inspiration for that?
Nothing I can point to specifically. There's a MacGuffin, and you gotta get the MacGuffin, and you gotta figure out how to go from point A to point B to point C to get it. If anything, maybe it harkens back to something like White Plume Mountain, where you gotta find the swords, and you gotta go through all the steps to do it. But nothing in particular that I could point to, at least consciously.
I thought it was cool. So good touch there.
Well, I did too. So
All right, my friend. Well, I appreciate you giving us this background on R2, and we'll catch you in R3.
absolutely. Can't wait.
Every time I talk to that dude, he gives me something to work with. He's a very entertaining presenter, very good talker. And once again, I do recommend that you check out R2. It is available on Drive-Thru RPG, both in PDF and softcover format. And I'm happy to recommend that you buy this thing because Joe Bloch loves you and wants you to have a good game. And I like it when people that are trying to sell me stuff actually like me. And so that's what I've got. What did you think about R2 Beneath the Great Rift? Do let me know in the comments. And oh yeah, remember to like and subscribe, share this around to other folks, and run this for your table. And my dear, dear friends, while we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best. I think the best news I've got since last time we talked, which wasn't that long, is in a span of about less than 2 weeks, I lost 12 pounds. And the only thing
Great.
I can figure out is the cause was I drank a lot more pina coladas. That's the only thing that changed in the diet. There was no other health issue.